After World War II is over, you're going to find the United States is in a very unique position. Of course, we lose men during the war. We lose over 380,000 men due to World War II, but that's nothing compared to the other countries of World War II. But we are in a unique position because we don't lose our ability to produce. Our factories are not bombed at home. Uh, our our land's still very farmable. There's nothing bad happening in the homeland in terms of what happened to Europe and to an extent some other parts of the world. You're going to see that the 1950s represent an unprecedented time for job growth. Our economy is going to be greatly boosted. One of the things that you saw last chapter that we mentioned, the Marshall Plan, the fact that we are giving money to other countries in Europe to help them rebuild themselves. That was important, but they are spending it on American goods and services. You take a look at this, and this shows you some of the most productive times in American history in terms of GDP growth. Gross domestic product, remember the value of all the goods and services that are being produced. And you take a look at that time period, 1948 to 1953, there is a significant growth in GDP, near 5%. You see the late 1950s and into the 60s is the same. And even 1953 through 57, there's a significant time of positive growth for our economy. Okay, and there's a number of reasons why, other than just because of the war and that lifting us out of there too. During the war, obviously, we need war machines. We're going to need a lot of uniforms, food, production. We just mentioned the Marshall Plan is going to help stimulate growth. But during the Eisenhower administration, he's going to bring another important project to fruition that will cause significant growth, and that's the United States Interstate Highway System. In 1956, you see the interstate highway system become a reality. What we see here is a nice network of roads that are freeways. No stoplights, high speed limits. It links up the entire country. The interstate highway system is going to provide, in its instant moment, the moment that it's conceived, you're going to think of the planners involved. You're going to think of the construction workers involved, the steel industry, concrete, all the things that you would need to build this massive network of roads. And when they initially start, we're talking somewhere in the neighborhood of 35,000 to 40,000 miles of road. And since that time, it's only expanded. If you take a look at the interstate highway system in this little graphic, it's going to operate or cover a significant amount of miles over time. And that road network, since 1956, is becoming more and more extensive. And it provides a lot of benefits. Obviously, you can personally travel from one place to another far more quickly by road. Going across the country before the interstate highway system would have taken you weeks on the U.S. highways. But now with the interstate, I mean, you can do it in less than a week. The high speed limits people like, but for personal transportation, it's great. Yet it provides a really, really interesting facet for people who want to do business across the country. It provides easier transportation of goods and services. And now, if you, for example, if you have a business in West Virginia, the interstate lets you expand the market that you can reach, especially if you've got things that are, for example, perishable goods. So the mileage that the interstate highway is covering is still expanding even today. So we're getting to a point where we see just how important this is. The trucking industry develops tremendously after the advent of the interstate highway. And so the interstate highway is going to help our economy in general in terms of providing jobs instantly for construction. Of course, there's still maintenance that has to be done on it, and the expansion of our markets and where you can ship things to. Those are tremendous in terms of the economic growth. Of course, there's some downsides too. The interstate highway system kills a lot of small towns. Small towns had developed around the U.S. highway system, and once the interstate is built, those are bypassed. And now you don't really see those small towns like you used to. Another problem too, when you have people driving at high speeds on open road, you tend to get more accidents. So you see the number of deaths in automobiles go up tremendously. Another important part of the United States during this time period is something we call the baby boom. From the late 40s up until the early 1960s, the United States is going to see an increase in the number of children that families were having. You see here that prior to World War II, the average number of babies per woman is about 2.2, and it extends upward to 3.6 by the early 1960s. What causes that particular surge? Well, the answer is pretty simple. After World War II, veterans come home and they're extremely happy to see their wives, and vice versa. So you can figure out how that might lead to more babies. But that's only a temporary thing. Um, the reason that people tend to have more children is because they have more money in the 1950s in order to have those children and take care of them. That's a trend you see constantly over time. Now, you notice that the birth rate descends back downward, and we're relatively stable now at 2.0, which is about where you want to be just to replace people. All right, so people are having more children because they can afford it. Okay. Also, you're going to see major changes in technology in the 1950s. It's a tremendous time of growth. This picture right here, if you don't know, represents one of the first computers. Computers are just fancy calculating machines. And the original computers were doing mathematical formulas and doing various equations. And you can see in the background, the little round things are giant reels of tape. Instead of recording information on a hard drive or a flash drive, you recorded them on reels of tape, which is pretty fascinating. The computer has obviously changed since the 1950s, but you also got the advent of the internet. The internet is just a network of computers that communicate back and forth with each other. And originally, the internet was something that was thought of in case of a nuclear conflict. We would see computers be able to talk to one another if somehow we weren't able to communicate in other capacities. You also see medical technology advancing. The picture you see right here is the first kidney transplant. We never thought, at least to some degree, that human beings would be able to do such a thing. But now we not only transplant kidneys, but we can do lungs, liver, heart. It's so impressive. And to think that we've been doing kidney transplants for more than half a century now. Okay. You also see the polio vaccine, what was a terribly deadly disease, nervous disease that affected a number of people, including former President Franklin Roosevelt, killed a lot of individuals as well. And usually it affected children, but people were terrified at outbreaks of polio. But Jonas Salk creates a vaccine or discovers a vaccine for polio. And at the same time, he actually surrendered or made the patent open so that he wasn't making any money off of it just because he wanted people to be better. The technology at the time is radically changing in terms of the economy too. Because consumers had so much money, you start to see the development of what we call credit cards, a novel idea then that didn't quite take off immediately, but eventually now everybody has a credit card. The economy's changing, medicine's changing. The digital technology that we have now was predicated upon so many things that happened back then. Right? You also see a major change in birth control. Birth control was obviously something that didn't exist in its current form back in the 1950s, but in the late 50s, the advent of the birth control pill becomes something that changes the habits of women. This is probably another reason that you get a leveling off to some extent of the baby boom and the birth rate. Women can actually control when they want to have children. Many instances in the past, babies would just be a pleasant surprise. Right? We'll talk more about educational opportunities and how that's going to cause some economic growth with the GI Bill.